What is up, everybody? We're talking about features. Do I have my AirPods in? Whoa, what a jerk, right? So today we are talking about, I got my list again because I don't want to miss anything. We're talking about more things I think Panasonic should do. My last video was talking about some big revolutionary features that Panasonic might include in a GH6 and S1H Mark II, stealing ideas from Nikon and DJI and all that stuff. You can check out that video after this one if you want to. But I've got a whole laundry list of improvements, some big, some small, that I think Panasonic could pretty easily implement in future cameras or even in software updates, you know. I think I'm gonna cut this video into two parts, or maybe there'll be, first half and second half, but I think I'm gonna do hardware stuff, like products they could make, new lenses and gear and accessories, and then like software and UI stuff and things like that. So, check those chapters. You'll know which one happens when I talk about the first one. So let's get right into it. Number one would be a stepping crop mode, sort of like the Sony does and the JVC did back in the day. So like I know Sony has like the clear image zoom, is that what it's called? But you can like by 0.1, go to like 1.1, 1.2, slowly crop in on your image creatively, or maybe you're using lenses with a smaller image circle or, something like that. And so say you've got an APS-C lens and you want to crop in just a little bit because the image circle is actually slightly bigger than APS-C and you want to get as much real estate out of that lens as possible. Well, just being able to step in slightly or step out slightly can be really useful. And if we want to go even further than that, we can look to the JVC camera, which was a Micro Four Thirds camera with a APS-C sensor, which is very unique and very interesting to me. But that camera, you could actually zoom smoothly while recording video, even on prime lenses. It would basically live crop. And Panasonic has a version of this already called Focus Transition. And so if you could just manually focus transition while recording, just to slightly change your framing by, let's say it's just the 1 to 1.5 times crop, I still think that would be super, super useful. So number one would be some form of live cropping that you could smoothly control while in video. The next thing would be a really good color profile. Now, I know Panasonic has a bit of a reputation for having bad colors, which I think is totally bogus. Their natural profile is really great. Their Cine D and Cine V version 2s are very good, but my favorite profile for these cameras is Vlog with the nicest LUT, which we're using right now. It's just a very pleasing LUT. It's got really good skin tones, really nice colors and contrast and highlight roll off, in my opinion. One of the best LUTs I've ever used. But how could they improve this? Well, I look at some cameras like Sony and Fuji with S Cinetone, I believe, or Fuji Eterna, which is a fairly flat, fairly flexible, but amazing looking color profile right in camera. And so I really do think Panasonic should include the VariCam nicest LUT directly in the camera. I think that's probably what they were going for Cine D and Cine V, but it's not quite there for me. And so having the ability to have nicest video recording internally and have basically their version of Fuji Eterna, I think would be incredible. And they've already got all of the stuff. You just have to do it in post instead of in camera. And so honestly, if it was in camera, I think it might be the only profile I ever use because it just looks that good. So I did an entire video on half of this next subject, but we all know Panasonic autofocus isn't amazing. Again, it's pretty good. Look at this. Oh, of course it fails right then, but it's not that bad. Okay. But something I think Panasonic could do, and they have been slowly working on, is including more and new autofocus modes. So they've included people tracking, they've got eye tracking now, and they've got animal tracking, which is really cool. But there's a few focus modes that very, very few companies offer that I think Panasonic absolutely should, because even if the efficacy of the focus contrast by focus whatever is, even if the contrast-based focus isn't that great, having these modes might allure some people. It might be like, well, I don't use it that much, but when I do use it, I'd love to have these features. And the two that I thought of were, one, product showcase mode. Again, I made that entire video trying to hack the camera so it could do product showcase mode. You know, people do the hold it up in front of your face thing, and it kind of works. Sometimes this is a bad subject because it's very dark, but yeah, it doesn't work great. Other things you can do are, it's all workarounds. That's the problem. If there was a dedicated product showcase mode in the Lumix cameras that worked even decently, they would be like the only cameras that did it. The only two cameras in the world that I know that do it are the ZV-1 and the EV-10, which are vastly inferior cameras from a spec standpoint than, you know, anything from the GH or the S series. So first was product showcase mode. The second one is something Canon does, which is face-only tracking, which is a very good content creator or filmmaker tool. So what that basically is, it's just face tracking, but when there's no face in the frame, it stops. So it would be like if I was in the frame, I'm gonna see if I can manually do it, and then I would leave, and oh, I hit the wrong button. No, well, let's do it again. So like, oh, it's tracking, and then I leave, and it stays out of focus. And then if I come back in, it starts tracking again. So having a face only for interviews might actually really benefit the Panasonic autofocus system that typically has a little bit of trouble with autofocus, but if it knew that it only had to focus on faces and then stop, it actually might really help the autofocus system. And it's a great feature. Those are both great autofocus modes that I'm sure people have bought those cameras just for those features. And so, I mean, call it something different, obviously, like, hey, let me copy your homework, okay, but don't make it too noticeable kind of thing. Call it like item, like show and tell autofocus mode. All right, Panasonic, this is one we really need to talk about. Let's, you know what, let's bring this one in. We got to take that focus square off, man. I understand you want to see where you're going to punch in, but let us turn the opacity down. Let us turn it off. Something, because it's very distracting when you're framing your shot and there's that square just always there. I get it. You need it for autofocus too. You know, you probably shouldn't be able to turn it off for that. But in manual focus, video mode, where a completely clean screen would be so clutch, that square is always there. And I don't know why. Cancel the square. And being able to punch in is great, but do we really need to 100% of the time see where we would punch in if we were to do so? I don't think so. Let's take care of it. Easy peasy. That's an easy one. That could be a firmware update. So easy. Oh, resume the wrong way. All right, let's get back to the list. Let's see what's next. All right, Panasonic, this is another easy one. This is a softball, and that is fix the custom 1, 2, 3 modes. So those modes are great. I do use them. Okay, I don't use them, but I did. You know why I stopped? It's because when you save a profile to those modes, it saves every single setting. It saves your custom profiles. It saves your picture profile. So if you ever edit your natural profile in manual mode and you go to C1, all of that natural adjustments or the contrast curve or the sharpness is reset to when you first saved that C1 custom 1 profile. Worse than that is your white balance stuck, your ISO stuck, your shutter speed, aperture, whatever is all locked in permanently unless you go to C1, change that stuff for your current shoot or settings, and then save it again down in the custom menus. Maybe that works for some people and you want to save those settings, but I think for most people, they would love to save things like the resolution and frame rate, like a slow motion mode is something a lot of people use for it, but the specific white balance and ISO settings is obviously something that changes constantly. And so the ability to save everything but your shutter speed, ISO, white balance, whatever. Maybe there's a checklist, you know. Here's the stuff that gets saved over on the C1s and C2 and C3. And here's the stuff that can dynamically change and stay updated. So yeah, we got to fix those. And you know what? On the line of that, keeping on that theme of stuff to fix, this is something that I've seen people coming from other camera systems complain about. And that is having different settings in movie and photo mode. So this is again something that should probably be able to be enabled or disabled, but if you look at something like, I think it's Fuji, if you set up some settings in photo mode and then switch to video mode, those settings are different. You know, you set your ISO, your aperture, whatever in photos, it stays that way. Which I don't know how it works with the dials, but I think someone said this. Anyway, you switch to movie mode and you have your movie settings. You switch to photo mode and you have your photo settings, because video and photography have very different needs. So for video, of course, you're locked into specific shutter speeds and ISOs and you want manual control. But for me, when I do photography, sometimes I'm just like auto ISO. I pick the shutter speed and the aperture creatively and just kind of let the ISO do its thing. Maybe even let the auto white balance do its thing, who knows. But the point is, if you're a hybrid shooter and you're in a fast-paced environment shooting photos and videos, switching back from photo to video and having the exact same settings can definitely slow down the process. So the ability to partition out the settings for photo and for video and have, you know, say a slightly faster shutter speed and auto ISO in photos, and then switch to video where your 180-degree shutter angle is locked in and everything, I think would be a good change. Maybe that doesn't work for everybody, and maybe that's something that could be enabled or disabled, but for those solo photo, video, true hybrid shooters, I think that's something that needs to be seriously considered. Oh, here's something that I thought would be really fun. So for the tech guys out there, for the nerds out there, for the YouTubers like me, I think it would be great to have some software that's basically like an EXIF data reader for Panasonic stuff, but especially for video, because, I mean, think about it, if you had an analysis window plugin for Premiere or a separate program where you could display your white balance and your ISO and all your settings and, you know, your focal length, you know, how much easier would certain projects be for video if you could display all that information, especially for content creators and camera testers and things like that. And so having some like metadata plugins or software would be really cool, I think, because I know that metadata is in there. I just think it's not in a very accessible way. We can do it with photos, why not for video? More software stuff. This might be a little too complicated for just software updates, but in future cameras, you know, Panasonic's been great about exposure tools. I love using the little exposure thing at the bottom as like a really quick, fast, and loose kind of exposure, you know, shorthand. But they've got waveforms and all this stuff, and so I think the final frontier of exposure, you know, features inside Lumix cameras would be internal false color. They've pretty much done everything else at this point, and they do an amazing job, but being able to use false color inside the camera, I personally really like false color. I still don't know how to expose for vlog using false color, but besides that, it's a really great tool once you learn how to use it, and I think having that inside the camera would be good. So we'll see if they do it. One of my favorite features on the new Panasonic cameras is when you're in auto ISO mode, you can actually see the ISO changing in real time. As back with the GH5 original, you would set it to auto ISO and you would have no idea if it was at 200 or at 12,800. I mean, I know you could set a limit, an upper limit, and I know that you could probably make a pretty good guess, but being able to know that auto ISO on the fly was really cool. I think if they did something similar with white balance, that would be incredible. So that's like a twofold thing. The first one would be if you're on auto white balance, especially if you hit the like white balance button, I think it should tell you your Kelvin and have like a little slider like it does when you set the custom Kelvin, just so you know, because, you know, I think it's a pretty common thing in certain situations to be like, let's go to auto white balance just to see what the camera thinks is right. And if it looks good, you're like, cool. You search through the presets, you change the sliders, and nothing really quite looks like the auto white balance, and you don't know why. And so having more information displayed in those auto modes would be really helpful. The other one would be when you do the autofocus capture, where you hold up something white like a video card or just a piece of paper to capture a perfect white balance. That should also display what the Kelvin and tint information of that capture was, so you can match other cameras to it, rather than like bringing it right up close to that same piece of paper or that same location, just being like, oh, it's 4200 Kelvin, 2 stops towards purple. Okay, here we go, And so, yeah, that is another feature that I think the more information, the better, honestly. The better you can capture and match these cameras, the better, I think, and easier and more streamlined this experience will end up being. Oh, this might be the most chaotic video I've made, so hope you're into it. I'm trying to lightning round it. I'm trying to make these videos quicker, he says, as he's been recording for 13 minutes. All right, back to the list. We're trying to go fast here. So you guys may or may not be familiar with this device. It's called the XLR1. It's a hot shoe XLR audio adapter for GH5, the S series cameras, things like that. So, but that already exists, you might be saying. Well, I'm thinking, why are we not taking advantage of that hot shoe connection more? Something along the lines of what like Sony does. They've got shotgun mics and other accessories that plug directly into the hot shoe mount that are straight on there. I mean, think if you could have a wireless, direct connected to the hot shoe mount microphone, shotgun microphone, lav microphone, cut out that entire XLR1 thing that requires the XLR1 and then a separate microphone, and just connect it straight to the hot shoe. I think the technology already exists for Panasonic, and I think it's something that a lot of people would really appreciate, especially if they follow this next suggestion I have for them. Yeah, if they make that hot shoe microphone, that hot shoe lav, to have a really small, tight package, I think they should do this as well, which is finally make a good vlogging camera. I mean, Panasonic autofocus has come a long way. I mean, I use autofocus in a lot of stuff, and it works pretty good. I mean, look, it's not bad. So, they tried. They made the GFX, no, that's Fuji. They made the vlogging camera recently, but it had significant, like, crushing problems. And that was no IBIS and a 4K crop. We need a wide angle, well-stabilized, small camera, and that's all that matters. No crop in 4K and IBIS. Even like just okay IBIS like in the S5 would do. Whether it's micro four thirds or full frame, you need that vlogging camera. I don't think any company has done it yet. Sony keeps trying with the ZV-1 and the ZV-10. Canon's making huge cameras. There's no decent, maybe something from Fuji, but I think if Panasonic could make a well-stabilized, non-cropped vlogging style camera that may be able to take advantage of those hot shoe lavs and shotguns, that could be, even with the just okay autofocus compared to the competition, could be something that sells a lot of units. I mean, I think Panasonic's might be taking the wrong lesson away from their failed vlogging camera, but that camera failed because you couldn't vlog with it. I mean, let that sink in. They made a vlogging camera you can't vlog effectively with. The S5 is a better vlogging camera. I mean, gee. So, I've got another idea for a camera, Panasonic. This one's for free. Take it. All I request is to be made an ambassador and to receive all the products for free. No, I'm just kidding, but my email me. So, I think something that is becoming a trend with Fuji, Nikon's done it as well. Maybe this is the same camera as the vlogging camera that I've suggested you guys make. Maybe it's totally different, but it's a vintage retro style camera. Panasonic's even done this before a little bit with cameras like maybe the LX100 series of cameras where it had the dials and the clickies and really great tactile controls. And Panasonic already does that well in a modern sense. And so implementing a vintage exposure compensation and shutter speed and aperture ring would be super sick. I mean, I mocked this up using the LX100 and some of the Leica lenses that have aperture rings on it, but this is a cool, somewhat modern, somewhat vintage aesthetic, and I think Panasonic coming out with a well-spec'd, decently performing vintage camera. I mean, that's the biggest problem I have with the vintage style cameras from like Nikon, is they're kind of bad. And so if Panasonic had even a halfway decent vintage retro aesthetic camera, I mean, they work with Leica already, just make a Leica Vibes camera. Maybe even make it certified by Leica and charge a bunch of money for it. Who knows, but I think that's a really good option. Whether that's the same as the vlogging camera or different, who knows, but yeah, I think it's definitely a trend, and I definitely think it's going to stay, and I think a lot of people would really appreciate a relatively small, relatively well-performing vintage-style camera, especially if you used it with like the 12mm with the aperture ring or like the 15mm with the aperture ring. I think that would be a great little fun travel vintage more words camera. This is a suggestion I think I got from my buddy Alpaco Films, and it was suggesting, maybe it was my buddy Wyatt. Anyway, he was suggesting doing something like that Blackmagic does, which is put more micro XLRs on cameras. You know, I think that's a pretty good idea. So if you can fit it on the S1H Mark II, right on the body, why not? So this one's easy. Just put SDIs in more cameras. So this is kind of a big idea. It might not be as doable as some of the other ones, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Why is there not a handle that is a recorder, that is a focus wheel, that is just a control wheel for the Lumix cameras? I only ask this because there are gimbals where you can plug in a USB-C and you can control the aperture, you can control all of the settings, and you can even control the focus. Now, those products are not made by Panasonic, so they don't work that great. They're a little bit weird. But why, with lenses that have electronic focus, is there not a way to electronically change your focus? This could be wireless on Bluetooth. This could be plugged into the USB-C. But a handle where you could change the focus of the Lumix lenses, either remotely like the DJI Ronin or connected to your camera on like a shoulder rig. I don't know why we don't have that. It seems like the technology is all there. Panasonic would just have to make it, or somebody needs to make it anyway. The next one is tally lights. Now, the S-series cameras do have the red ring around the recording screen, which is great, but I don't know why more of their cameras don't have tally lights. I think that's really useful to be able to look across the room and see, oh yeah, my camera is still recording. That's a good thing. And most cameras have a little focus assist light, you know, that shoots out that little red beam and everything to help focus. Like, couldn't you just turn that down to like 10% brightness and use that to have a tally light? I don't get it, but more tally lights would be better. I mean, hell, maybe we can even have some kind of attachment on a kit. I don't know. That's probably not going to work. I don't know. But some tally light would be good. I'm going to bring this up again because I want to, you know, say I called it if they do it. But I think for Micro Four Thirds, some crazy fast F1 video-centric clutch, focus, aperture ring lenses, prime lenses would be incredible. So Panasonic, what were those revolutionary primes about? Was that just marketing talk? Was that mistranslation? I don't know. But I am excited to see what those F1 primes do. And honestly, something else Panasonic needs to do is to make more wide-angle lenses, because the widest angle lens, prime lens on the entire Micro Four Thirds system that's not a fisheye is 12 millimeters, 24 millimeters equivalent. Like, what's that about? Make a 9mm, a 10mm, 7mm, something, you know, and put that on the vlogging camera we talked about earlier. Anyway, so yeah, we'll see what they do with these primes. Anyway, guys, another video with Panasonic autofocus being somewhat well behaved, and another video done. I know this was probably super chaotic. I've probably had a little bit too much coffee today, but Hopefully you like the energy from this video. Less planned out. It was more of a bullet point type of video than like a full script or anything like that. So yeah, what did you think of this sort of casual style of discussion? What do you guys think of some of these things? What's the #1 hardware and #1 software feature you guys would like to see when it comes to Panasonic cameras from this list? Or do you have some stuff that I might have missed that you wish Panasonic would implement? And don't just say better autofocus, because they're not gonna do it. You know they're not gonna. Anyway, leave a comment, like, comment, subscribe. And if you did subscribe, I will see you in the next video.